Baruch atah
Baruch atah
Adonai,
Adonai,
Eloheinu
Eloheinu
melech
melech
haolam,
haolam,
asher
asher
kiddushanu
kiddushanu b'mitzvotav,
mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
la'asot
la'asot
b'divrei
b'divrei
Torah.
Torah.
Amen. All right, so let's start with the paragraph. I'm sorry? Oh, let's start with the paragraph that starts at on page 295, the son of the king. Does somebody be willing to read?
Sure, if no one else is going to, as long as I can get my cat out of the way and not have him.
Well, maybe we should read your cat.
The son of the king accepted the kingdom high-handedly, very sharply, and he appointed his own nobles and dukes and princes and soldiers. And this son of the king was sophisticated and loved wisdom very much, and had by him very great intellectuals. And whoever came to him with some piece of wisdom was by him in very great esteem, and he would grant them honor and riches for their wisdom to each one according to his desire. I think we read this, but one wanted money, he gave him money.
The paragraph continues.
One wanted honor, he gave him honor, anything for wisdom. And because studying was so important to him, everyone occupied themselves with wisdom, and the whole nation delved in philosophies, chokhmot. Someone else has to pick up. I have a phone call I have to take.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
For one who desired money did so in order to receive money for it. And one who desired status and honor did likewise. And because all of them were busy only with philosophies, therefore they all forgot in that country, the strategies of war. Yeah, we did read this. How to conduct a war, for they were all busy with philosophies until all the citizens were great scholars, so that the least one in that country would be more learned than all the people in another country. And the wise men in that country were extremely great scholars. And because of their learnings, these wise men of that country became heretics and drew also the son of the king into their thinking. And he also became a heretic as well. However, the rest of the people did not become heretics, for there was great depth and subtlety in that wisdom of the scholars. Therefore, the rest of the citizens were not able to enter into that wisdom, and it did not harm them. But the wise men and the son of the king became heretics.
Okay, now we did read this last time.
Yes, we did.
And I just want to add one small comment, so I want to move on. There is a part of the Hasidic approach which has to do with the way in which great scholarship and great scholars are misleading. I forget now which Hasidic master is the one who said it. It might have been Nachman. Says, if you want to mislead a Jew, just get him a rabbi. And there is some great wisdom in this, because in thinking of things on this high theoretical level, but without the practical grounding, it's very easy to get lost. And we were talking about this just a few moments ago, being in the desert at night without signposts, without landmarks and so forth. That's kind of like what it's trying to go through the world only with theoretical knowledge. You know, this should be the direction, but is it? Who knows? So there was the idea, in a sense, that the masses had greater wisdom, in effect, than the great scholars did. That their intuitive grasp of Judaism, of Torah, and so forth, was worth more than the theologies and the philosophies of the great scholars, who, through their reasoning and so forth, would just lead everybody astray. Okay, so let's move on to the bottom of page 296, and there's a new paragraph there let's start. And somebody would volunteer, I'd appreciate it very much.
I'll volunteer.
Okay.
And the son of the king, because there was good in him, for he was born with good and had good and upright qualities, would frequently remind himself, where am I in the world? What am I doing, etc. He would make big sighs and was very mournful regarding this, that he had fallen to such puzzlement and strayed so far, and he would sigh much. But as soon as he began to use the intellect, the wisdom of the apostate, is that how you pronounce it, returned and became strong again. And it was this way several times that he would remember as described above, and he would sigh and groan. But as soon as he started to use his intellect, the heresy returned and became strong again.
Okay, let's stop here for a second. So what's this process? What is it that he's returning to, and which returns him to wisdom of a certain sort?
You would
What?
feel puzzled.
Sorry?
You would feel puzzled and confused.
He
And
was
then-
puzzled and confused.
And then
Yes.
he would use his intellect to get himself over it.
Well,
And
yeah,
it's
but is it
correct.
really wisdom? I mean, to me, what it sounds more like, with respect, is that he returns to the truths of the philosophies that have not really worked for him in the past. You know, you return to some truth or some wisdom that you have held on to in the past. And rather than giving it up, you will revert to the old way of thinking. And there is comfort in that. This is actually related to a psychological phenomenon called cognitive dissonance. When you get pushed by new information that requires a change in your paradigm, there are two things that can happen. You can either open up and accept this new paradigm, even though you're not sure exactly what it means or where it's going to lead, and you don't have the security of the old way of thinking, or you get you get afraid and you go back to the old way of thinking, even with its limitations and problems and conflicts and so forth. So I think that's what the new king or the prince is involved with. He would find a certain point at which he has to decide whether or not he's moving on into a new paradigm and leaving behind the old way of thinking. But he was so secure in the old way of thinking, even with its limitations, that he would return to it. This is part of the phenomenon of getting lost. All of us have had this experience. You're driving along and you follow what you think are the right directions, and it turns out that you just come back to the place where you started. But you don't know how to get out of this. You follow the directions. I must have made a mistake. I'll follow the directions again and make sure I don't make any mistakes. And you do that, and lo and behold, you wind up back at the same place again. How do you get out of that rut? Well, you have to take a different direction. But what if you don't know what the different direction is? Because the only directions you have are the old way of thinking, the old map, the old landmarks. Somehow you have to give those up in order to find your way. This is the essence of the journey that Abraham goes on. Abraham gives up all the old landmarks, all the old directions, and he strikes out in a new direction, and he gives up control of where he is going and trusts that God is going to lead him in the right direction, even though he doesn't know where that direction is leading or what the goal is or how to get there. He just says, okay, I'm in your hands. You bring me along and I'll go where you tell me to go. This is the essence of theological or spiritual learning in many different traditions, that you have to be able to surmount what you have already learned and where you've already gotten to in order to strike out in a different direction, go somewhere else, and find out what the new possibilities are. This is what it means to have a guru or a rabbi or some sort of spiritual leader who you follow. That's what makes it so difficult to find one that's worth following, because you don't know where you're going. I mean, there's not like there are landmarks along the way. You can say, oh, okay, we're on the right route. The whole point is you don't know. You might have a guess, and sometimes your guess will be right, and sometimes your guess will be wrong. But in order to find out where you're going to go and to get there, you have to give up control of the directions that you're following to somebody who is going to lead you. That's the essence of Abraham's journey. God becomes the one who leads him. And it is the same fact that explains how the wandering in the wilderness works for the Israelites. They follow Moses. Moses tells them where to go. And who tells Moses? God tells Moses. Everybody's in the hands of somebody more important and wiser than they are.
So I thought the Israelites were led in the desert by a pillar of fire, or at night, and then by day by a cloud.
That's exactly right. And who puts them there?
Well, presumably God does.
Yeah, okay.
But it's not. But you just said Moses led them.
Oh,
so
well,
that's the part that's unclear.
Oh, well, these are signs that the Israelites follow, but Moses gives them directions plenty of times. We're going to go to this particular location, which he gives a name to, or what have you. So it's not only the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. Moses interprets that and tells them this is where it means. We're going to Coney Island, and that's where the pillar of fire is above. It tells us it's pointing towards Coney Island,
and good hot dogs. What are you talking about?
Good hot dogs, good French fries, orange creamsicle ice cream.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're actually hard to find.
Oh, now they are, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, orange creamsicles, boy, they were
the best.
They were the best. Yeah, so he tells them the places that they're going to, not because he's picked them out, but because the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire has indicated them. Okay, so it's a kind of joint progress. The Israelites themselves give up control of this journey. They are not in charge of the directions.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like you're driving along and you're sitting behind the wheel, and you're nowadays it's different, but in the old days your wife was sitting there in the passenger seat and she had the map, and she said, I think you ought to turn right over here, and you would say, Oh, no, I know where I'm going. And you wouldn't turn right where she told you to, even though she's reading the map. And you would make a left turn instead, and you would wind up God knows where. And then you'd have to find out how to get back to where you're supposed to be.
And my mom would start yelling at my dad.
That happened too.
And she'd say something like, you have to admit it when you don't know.
Yeah, and that was always sort of the crux of the argument. I know. You don't know. The map says this. Forget the map. I know where I'm going. It was hysterical. There was one time, Linda and I, this is many years ago, we're driving to somewhere in New Jersey, God knows where. And we had written directions. You have to remember, it's a long time ago. There was no GPS. There was none of these things. We had written directions, like by words on a piece of paper. And we thought the directions on the piece of paper, but we wound up literally on the edge of the Hudson River. If we had by mistake to continue to huge speed, our car would have slipped into New York Harbor. And so fortunately, I kind of realized that we were not in the right place. There's no way we should have been right up on the edge of the water. So we backed up and we tried a different direction. We eventually got to where we were supposed to go, but it wasn't by following the directions that we were given. Those were useless.
Kerry,
Yeah.
I spent quite a number of years in New York, and I was quite familiar with New York. And I remember going there once and taking a taxi to a place that I sort of vaguely knew where it was. And I kept watching as the taxi driver went in ways that I thought would get us totally lost.
Yeah.
And I was so tempted to try to correct the taxi driver.
Right.
But I just kept my peace.
Yeah.
And by doing so, I ended up getting where I needed to go. But I had to have faith in some ways that he was going to end up, that he knew well enough to get us where he was going. And in retrospect, it turned out he had gone a very efficient way that I just was not familiar with.
Right. Yeah, well, that's a good example of the dilemma that I'm talking about.
Yes.
Because giving up control to the appropriate guide is an important step in getting to anywhere that you want to get to if you haven't been there before. So yes, that's part of what's going on in this process of spiritual growth, of learning. You have to be able, you have to know when to give up control yourself and say, okay, I'm in the hands of some other person, or I'm in the hands of some other force, and I need to give up the idea that I'm going to control how I get where I'm going to go, and just go along for the ride. Yeah, Judith.
The key word there is the appropriate guide. We had absolutely the opposite experience. We had flown 17 hours to Johannesburg.
Oh.
And we got in a taxi and said we have reservations at the Holiday Inn. And an hour and a half later, we finally found the Holiday Inn.
Really?
Not the appropriate guide.
No. Well, that's one of the challenges of going on any journey, specifically, but especially one where you are opening yourself to change. You have to find a guide whom you can trust, and not only that you can trust, but they know where they're going. Especially when you don't know, so you pass by landmarks. You say, "This doesn't look right. This doesn't look like the right way to go," but it may well be the right way to go, even though it doesn't look familiar. in point of fact, it often is exactly the point that wherever you're going to go, it's not going to look familiar. That's kind of why you're going in this different direction, why you're opening yourself up to the possibility. You're going to go to somewhere you're not familiar with by some route you're not familiar with, and that is that level of trust is what allows you to get to a new place. You know, as the Fire Science Theater would say, you can't get there from here. So, yes,
Rabbi Baker? Yes, what you're saying makes me think a little bit about the fact that when we're on this path towards wherever we're going by the studying we're doing and other
Yeah.
things, Judaism has a lot of sort of appreciation for our forefathers and our foremothers,
yes,
basically saying that here are some people who started this off and
right.
somehow they figured out or were told or whatever how to get to this place. So therefore, the procedures that have come down through the ages to us for the observances and the tracks that we should follow are legitimate because here's this initial legitimacy.
Yes, that's true. But it also accepts or accommodates correctives. So the point of the wilderness experience is that they go back over the same territory because they got lost, or they have to try a different route, even though they've already been, they followed the directions already. It's not like it's a straight line journey. There are meanderings. There are double backs. There are periods where you lose yourself, and that's part of the experience too.
They're
So,
also stuck with the mistakes of their parents.
yes, they are, but some of them might be mistakes, and some of them might not really be mistakes. Some of them might have some value, you know, which is why, you know, in Judaism, we don't throw anything out. We have all sorts of texts.
Except for chametz.
Oh, all right, I'll give you a comment.
I don't know what that
Don't
is.
throw out chametz at a
It's-
particular
Oh,
time.
hummus? What are you saying?
No, leavened product.
Oh, okay.
Chametz.
When
Before
you-
Passover. Yeah,
Yeah.
When you are preparing for Passover,
yeah.
you have to get rid of all the chametz in your house.
Right, right.
But,
Yeah.
Number one, how do you find the chametz to throw out? You could get a very intense flashlight.
I know. No, I read about that in the Talmud, that you don't use two candles with the wicks together because that's too bright. That's a lantern. You
Right,
just
you
use one
get
candle.
One candle and a feather.
And what?
A feather.
And a piece of cardboard to brush it onto, which
Right.
is what we used to do.
Oh,
Yeah. So that's part of the process. It is the most inefficient way to get rid of chametz that you could possibly have created. That's number one. But number two is, let's say you're not talking about the crumbs of chametz. You're talking about, okay, you've got loaves of bread in your freezer or whatever. What do you do with those things? Well, here's what you do.
you take it to a neighbor.
You can't just take it to a neighbor. You have to sell it.
Sell it to them and then buy it back or something.
That's right, because you
Right.
can't possess them. So you sell it to them, but the understanding is that they will sell it back at the appropriate time for the same amount of money. They're not allowed to make money on it. You're not.
But it has to be, the neighbor would have to be not a Jew.
That's right, because they can't. If they're a Jew, they can't own it either.
And then what we read yesterday is they couldn't be a stranger either.
I'm not following that, Kim.
Well, they still need to follow the law, don't they? As a stranger?
Well, but they are. They they're not bound by the commandments the way the Israelites are. If they follow them out of choice, not out of legal obligation. So That's why somebody who follows the halakha, the law, but does so out of choice, but not out of legal obligation.
But we read yesterday that the Sabbath should be followed by strangers.
Well, they follow, but they're not obligated to. So they don't get mitzvah points for observing the Sabbath. The Israelites do, because they're under obligation. And the obligation is what tempts you to disobey. If you're not under obligation, there's no tempting to disobey. It doesn't count. So if you disobey, it doesn't mean the same thing. So the calculation is just different.
He's a baby.
Sorry? I heard somebody say something. No? All right. So, so the prince, that is to say the young king, returns to the old wisdom because it's comfortable, because it's not a challenge. But he also doesn't make progress on the spiritual journey. So this is really sort of the dilemma that faces all of us as people who are trying to grow spiritually. The temptation to return to our old understandings is very, very strong. And the fear and discomfort involved in embarking on a different journey is sometimes overwhelming, sometimes daunting. But we have to be able to do this. Now, I've spoken in the past, I don't know if it was with people in this group or another group. There's somebody famous called, well, actually not all that famous, named Nachshon ben Aminadav, who was the person who, according to the rabbis, was the one who led the Israelites into the Red Sea. And what was the hallmark of his leadership? What did it mean? Why was it valuable that he led them into the Red Sea? Well, the point is that he didn't know when he was taking a step that would be the last step, when he would be taking a step that would lead to his drowning. He had to be able to give up safety. It doesn't make any sense to leap into the unknown if there's no danger involved. There has to be some unknown. So Nachshon leads everybody into the Red Sea, and because he winds up taking steps where he doesn't know where the bottom is or what's going to happen, that's when the Red Sea parts. If he had known that it was going to part, or what he would do in order to make it part, it wouldn't have parted. It parts because he enters into the sea without the security of knowing what's going to happen with what step. And this is what opens the way for the rest of the Israelites. This is the same idea. Nachshon was a great leader, great guru, great teacher, or whatever, because he knew that in order to make spiritual progress, he had to enter into the unknown. And that's what he did. He was willing to take that risk. And in so doing, he made it easier, made it possible for the Israelites to do the same thing. It's a pretty neat idea.
Yeah, I heard a story yesterday that in Mexico, there's some pyramids at Teotihuacan.
I'm sorry, there's somebody ringing my doorbell. I will be right back. Hey.
I will tell you guys. There's some it's a great story. There's some pyramids at Teotihuacan, and there's something that the Mexicans would have to do is jump off this 100-foot cliff. And this was like a rite of passage. What they didn't know was in the middle of the night, they had undammed some river. So what they were actually jumping into was water, 20 feet of water, not ground. And yet they couldn't see the water from where they were jumping from. So one by one, they would jump and they would be brave and they would give their life to
Thank you very much.
whoever and survive. But it's kind of like walking into the sea, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, Stephanie, you fixed your clock.
I fixed my clock for you, Judith.
I'm sorry I missed your story, Kim.
At Teotihuacan, there-
Yeah.
which is where pyramids are in Mexico, there
Uh-huh.
was this exercise as a rite of passage where you would have to jump off a 100-foot cliff.
Uh-huh.
What they didn't know is that the night before they had undammed some river and there was 20 feet of water there, but you couldn't see it from where you were jumping from.
Oh,
So one by one they would jump and they would fall into the water and survive. But it's
so
kind
they
of,
were jumping
and
into,
in Buddhism, we have the same thing of stepping off a 100-foot pole.
yeah,
And
well, I think
until
it's
you
like
do that,
it's known in other traditions.
yeah, until you do that, you're nowhere. You have to take that chance.
You do have to take a chance, and really, it's more than a chance. It's I'll put it this way. When you say you have to take the chance, it implies that there is the possibility that it will turn out all right. That you kind of suspect that it's okay. That's what taking a chance entails. But that's not the same thing as understanding that there is no assurance at all, which is what Nachshon is demonstrating. And
Yeah,
some
that's
other-
interesting. I heard of a doctor the other day who would not give the patient any probability.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering if that's connected, but that may be a new style.
Maybe it is. I mean,
Because
doctors-
it's such a complicated issue, probability, and
yes.
we tend to misinterpret it quite a bit because we're one person, not 60%.
Well, that's true, but it's also a matter of what our hopes and dreams and expectations are. Given probabilities, there is a part of us that thinks automatically we're in the 60% or whatever it is that has the probability of things turning out okay. And in a way, you have to do that in order to survive, to have a positive view of what your chances are makes a difference.
Well, but you're suggesting another way to go besides the probability, because there still would be anxiety with the probability.
Yes,
Even-
there would be. You're right.
Yeah,
And what I'm saying is that the example of Nachshon is the example of not knowing one way or the other what could happen. It's not that there are probabilities that he's following. It's that there is an actual unknown. It's the step into the unknown that is required. So it's a much more daunting position to be in than most of us are willing to accept. We all want to hedge our bets to some degree, and it's very hard for us not to do that.
well, maybe I should say, excuse me, but there's one more story I want to say that I just heard the last couple of days.
You're on.
Buddha goes up to this young kid and says, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" And the young kid says, "For what?" And somehow it figures out it's about dying. And it's a strange story. And then that evening, the kid dies in a accident.
Okay.
But
That's
because we're looking at probability, we don't think that's a possibility when we're a young kid, especially.
no, because we always want to think we're in the half of the probability equation that's positive.
Right.
We're going to be among those who don't contract the disease.
In fact, criminals do that. Criminals rely on the fact that they're not going to get caught, and they're looking at that part of the equation that
well, it's not just criminals. I think it's lots and lots of people. Your spouse comes home from a visit to the doctor and has gotten terrible news that he or she has cancer. And what's the first question that gets asked? Well, what's the probabilities? How many chances out of 10 are there that you will survive this condition? And then you say it's 20%, it's 30%, it's 50%. Well, you're going to do everything you can, and you will be in that 20%. But as we all know, that is not always how it works out. But that's where we go directly with this. To do all the things that are necessary to do to increase the likelihood that you're in the 20%.
But you're suggesting there's another view.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that the percentages are not only impossible to really determine or to manipulate, that they get in the way of actually taking on the risk that is required in order for the experience to be meaningful. If you're going to work toward spiritual growth, you have to give up the possibility of hedging your bets.
So is faith an element here?
Well, that's an interesting question that I've been asked many times. It depends on what you mean by faith. There are different models for what faith is. But my point of view about it is that if your view of faith is that it gives you some kind of assurance of what the outcome is, then it's not really faith.
Yeah, we know that story about the eagle comes to save the man or whatever, and then the man says, no, God will save me.
Yes. So from my point of view, is if the faith is one that is predictive, then it really isn't faith. It's some kind of probability. You have to enter into these challenges without a predicted outcome. That's what makes them really faith. Something is going to happen, but you don't know what.
Yeah, this is subtle. I really like this idea.
Yeah.
So the men who jump off the 100-foot cliff, they're not looking at percentages.
No, the whole point is they don't know that a whole bunch of water has come into that area, and that they're approaching it like the circus performer who's jumping off the high wire into the little pail of water, and that it doesn't look good. And if you do that, if you jump off into that pail of water, you can't have the idea that somehow miraculously there's going to be a huge amount of water there. It's just a pail. And if something is going to happen that saves your life, it's outside of your control. It's outside of your predictability. You're jumping into a pail of water. If something other than death comes out of it, it's news to me. So that's the nature of what makes the story of Nachshon ben Aminadav so interesting and such a good example for understanding what the experience of wandering in the wilderness is about. It's about jumping off the high wire into the pail of water, which is truly a pail of water, or it could be truly a pail of water. And you have no reason to think otherwise. And something is going to happen, and you don't know what, but it doesn't look good, maybe, you know. So that, I think that's the point. So what makes it valuable is that you are, as it were, betting everything on an unknown. Your life, your welfare, your understanding, whatever, all depends upon something that is truly unknown to you, in which you can't hedge your bets about. That's what Abraham does. He goes off following what God tells him to do and where to go, but he has no assurances whatsoever of where that's going to be, or how he's going to get there, or what's going to happen along the way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is open to be determined. You can say, well, that's what's required for things to work out well. But there's no assurance that it's going to work out well just because you're willing to invest your life in some bet like that without any kind of assurance. You don't necessarily come out on the positive end just because you're willing to endanger yourself or put yourself in a vulnerable position. Being vulnerable is required, but whether that therefore it makes it more, you're more inclined to come out well, that's, now you're skewing the bet. It's not about being vulnerable anymore. For some reason or other, you think you have reason to believe that by investing yourself in the possibility of the openness of the outcome, and somehow you're inclining yourself towards a more positive outcome. But that's not the point.
It's kind of a mental trick that we do where we just, so it's 50-50. So we just are going to focus on the positive 50. And there's a term, I don't know if you've entered it, but it's called spiritual bypassing. Have you ever heard of that? But
I don't believe I have.
It's basically the idea of doing a trick in your mind. So I'll just focus on this, or I'll just, that kind of thing.
Well, see, but that strikes me. I mean, this is the first I'm hearing this particular expression, but as you were describing it, it sounds like this is one way of putting your thumb on the scales.
It's 1 o'clock.
And I think that's kind of the part of all of this which has to be avoided in order.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what you're suggesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm suggesting. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. It's 1 o'clock, and we should stop now. So I hope everybody has a wonderful Shabbos. I hope you enjoyed the conversation today, and we will see each other next Friday. And Michael, I don't know, had to go somewhere or something, but goodbye to Michael, goodbye to you, Stephanie, and
Patty,
Judith, and Kim,
Rabbi, Judith.
and we'll see you all later. Bye-bye.